Welcome to Level Up Conversations presented by TEDxYYC in partnership with First Calgary Financial. In true TED fashion, TEDxYYC welcomes education expert Sue Mylde to discuss how teachers everywhere have been busy adapting their teaching techniques to online learning strategies. Sue will speak about the challenges and the opportunities of online teaching. Hello, welcome to the Level Up Conversations with TEDxYYC. My name is Tim Tamashiro, and I'm very happy to be here with you. We're talking about issues that revolve around COVID, and goodness knows there are a million different issues to think about. But today's issue that we're going to be discussing is education, and how do you pivot from learning in a classroom to learning online. With us today, we have an expert with us. Sue Mylde is an education technology integrator, and basically what that means is that she understands how to adapt when necessary. There's Sue with us here now. Hi, Sue. Welcome. I'm sorry about all of our technical glitches, but we're talking face-to-face now.
Well, thank you so much for having me into the TEDxYYC team, for having me to discuss something we're really all passionate about right now. So thank you.
Yeah,
So good to be here.
Oh, you betcha. So, in just discussing this challenge with you, you used a phrase, fail forward. And what that might mean, what that kind of resonates to me is that there are probably some opportunities for online learning that can come out of this. Can you kind of wrap my head around that a little bit better?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when I talk about failing forward, it really is now in a position where we're all in. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of, we don't know what the way forward is. We have things that we need to accomplish right now. So I found that during this time, there's a lot of skills that we're growing and learning from. Problem solving skills, some critical thinking, some real resilience that we are building from learning. At this time, and it's really about risk taking in some ways. We're taking small risks, some big risks, but as a teacher and from an education perspective, failing forward is also a way of role modeling what we're doing for our students and showing them that, even in a place of a global pandemic, we can all bandy together and learn from each other and learn from people, across the world and actually just right here in our virtual classrooms.
And I guess that's really what it boils down to. Unless you take some chances right now, you run the risk of actually becoming stagnant and not being able to adapt. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
absolutely. And, it's funny because right now, we say this, we're all in this together, but retail, business, we all have had to pivot and just, we talked about learning from other industries as well. While I know I'm talking about, from an education perspective, a lot of the skills that, we talk about, the mindsets that we have to have is going to be transferable to all areas of our lives because, we don't operate in silos.
Yeah.
Our fields are all interconnected and our lives are interconnected. So, yeah.
That's right. So, Sue, then, so what are some of the challenges that teachers and students and school boards are facing as moving forward with online teaching seems to be the method that we're all going to have to embrace?
Yeah, that's right. So, when I want to start with what you just said there, which is, this online school, this virtual learning environment is really, if you kind of put your mind to it and sort of change your mindset and imagine that online learning is really going to be a part of our fabric in some way, shape, or form. So it's not, we are uncertain. We don't know. But it might be here to stay for a while yet. And, who knows what might be in the future. So we need to think and talk and plan for online learning, in a way which is prioritizing the students that we are serving. So, in areas of connection and engagement, like those are I feel like the two main areas that we want to kind of, unpack a little bit.
Yeah, and that requires a lot of planning, a lot of forward thought. So teachers are renowned for their planning skills and their lesson planning skills. Now you have to think in terms of how do you do it in a way so that the students at home can make use of materials or make use of whatever they have. You don't have a supply closet, anymore.
No, I
Right?
love that you brought that up because really, some people think virtual learning, technology, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. But actually, it's not the technology so much as a teacher, my planning has completely changed. And I'm watching all my teacher colleagues. So as in my role as a tech integrator, I have the privilege of watching and facilitating and helping my teacher colleagues as they're trying to deliver their lessons. And I'm learning from other teacher colleagues across the world and here in our city. In trying to pivot their lesson plan and be more intentional
Hmm.
about how they engage students and how they make those connections for their students. And if you don't mind, Tim, I can share with you a great example that I've learned from.
That was my
Um,
very next question. I was hoping that you would have an example of what you mean. Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect. So I was in a grade 5 classroom where they were planning to do what is a virtual wax museum. So this happened like right at the top of March when they were actually planning that wax museum, in the building. So now we had to transfer virtually. So how do we actually make a virtual wax museum? So, but how do we make the task meaningful? How do we make students understand, or how do we help students understand that it's not an empty task. It's actually you're going to be learning some language skills, some writing skills, some presentation skills. And I was lucky enough to be involved in helping them create, or present, like write their speeches and present those speeches. So it's a multi-step process, and then they presented it on a tool called Flipgrid, and then they did their presentation as they've chosen their character, as it were, as part of that virtual wax museum, a historical character or somebody in our contemporary world. And
Okay.
seeing them go through that task involves a lot of teacher planning, but also
Hmm.
how rewarding it is to come out the other side when not only, well, because the virtual world is virtual and on the internet, we
Yeah.
now can have grandparents who may not live in the city visit that virtual wax museum, and parents who may not be able to work it during work hours. If you were to have a session in the building, they
Hmm.
can actually visit that at their convenience. So it's changed. And we talk about opportunities in adversity. It's really changed the way we can connect and help the students sort of remain and retain those connections and build on those connections. Now, you're going to ask me the next question, which is like,
Which is,
how do we measure this understanding and learning and all that?
are you reading my mind?
Well,
Yeah. So how do you measure success in the classroom? If you have a virtual wax museum
yep.
and you've had the students go through the process of creating presentations and utilizing online resources in order to create their presentations,
Yep.
and so how do you give a grade for that? I guess ultimately that's what it boils down to. How do you assess that?
Well, in our planning, again, thinking about what are we trying to achieve. So in education right now, most of us here in Alberta, we use the understanding by design method. So we look at what are our learning outcomes and build backwards from there. So the backwards design. And in this piece, we can in this particular example, we can assess for literacy, their writing skills, their speaking skills. We can assess their critical thinking skills, and we can give the students a rubric
Mm.
where we can tell them how well they've done. Now, the nice thing about this medium, again, an opportunity in adversity, is using that video medium to even give each other, the students are able to give each other peer feedback. And so they're
Hmm.
not just sort of learning themselves, but learning from each other. And you're able to engage in metacognition, which is also that sort of, thinking about thinking how I can improve myself by looking at other people's work. So there's a lot of rich learning in something as simple as, or as complicated, if you like, for as a virtual wax museum. And I really admire my teacher colleagues for the in-depth things that are happening all across the city and education right now.
And do you think that the students are going to come out of this time and, those grade 5 students who did the virtual wax museum, they'll
Yep.
probably remember that lesson probably for the rest of their lives because they really were hands-on in creating it and it was so new. How do you keep that process worthwhile for students, in the future, as more and more lessons kind of come online, how do you get it so that they can get feedback from you, but also talk with other students and have social connections and those types of things? Is that even possible?
You mean when we go back to a physical classroom or
No,
more
when
ongoing?
moving forward, come September, if we're back in the online classroom, is
Yeah.
it possible for students to still have that classroom feeling? I guess where they're making a presentation, but they're seeing their friends giving them the thumbs up, or maybe even getting a chance to go into a room to work, a virtual room to go and work with some of their friends on the project as well. Are those
Absolutely.
possibilities even there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think so. Here's the thing: connection and engagement, right? We want to engage students continuously in all the things that they are going forward, and with the making those connections. Now, one of the I guess the things that we're missing in our current world is we don't see each other, right? We're not
Yeah.
seeing our friends. We can't get together for play dates. And through these programs that we're using to connect, we can have small group meetings where students can connect and maybe just talk about nothing at all, but they can also talk about their projects. So giving them an opportunity to connect with each other in these small group sessions actually keep their relationship to be, it's still alive, if you like, even when we're so far away. So together but far apart,
Yeah.
like that famous hashtag. And again, engaging students in projects just going forward, which are meaningful, and those making those tasks meaningful for them, on a broader scale. And as they go forward and even into the high school, into the senior high, these tasks will evolve and change depending on
Hmm.
their abilities to, their skills and their abilities. Now, I also know of another example in junior high where they're putting social studies and science together, and in trying to solve a real world problem. So the real world problem, is maybe from the newspaper or something that teachers have uncovered, and they're putting
Hmm.
social studies as skills and science skills together, so students can make more meaningful connections out of the subject matters that they're learning, and put practical applications. So they're not just thinking about formulas or something in a lab, but
Hmm.
actually applying that to a real world problem, and then practicing their language arts skills by perhaps debating that problem and saying, taking a stance. What if I lived on this side of the river? What if you lived on that side of the river? What if I was a farmer? What if I was an environmentalist? How would you position yourself, and how would you think? Now, those tasks are rich and meaningful, and help
Hmm.
students to develop skills that are really important, like problem solving, critical thinking, innovation, creativity. All these in Alberta, we have these teaching the competencies that we want our students to graduate
Hmm.
with, and those are like right where the meat and potatoes of those lessons are. And it reminds our students that subjects don't happen in silos. And so again,
Yeah.
even in this virtual classroom, we can achieve so much.
You were telling me about what you described as kind of the lifeblood of the online classroom. And you told me about two ways that students learn: asynchronistic and synchronistic learning. What are the differences between those two, and why is a combination of those two so important in online learning, especially?
Yeah, absolutely. So these terms are very new to me: asynchronous learning and synchronous learning. They're about 3 months old now, because right at
Mm.
the time of COVID, we were trying to understand how to create a rich virtual classroom environment. So the synchronous idea is like having a meeting. You and
Hmm.
I plan to meet at 10 o'clock Monday. That's our classroom meeting. Now, the asynchronous session is where I prepare some materials. Now, this is again where that planning comes in, right? So teachers have to prepare some materials in advance. Maybe it's a website you're looking at, maybe it's some news articles, maybe it's a video you're watching. Now, I have that I have a repository that I use to communicate and say, this is where those materials are. Look at them in your own time, and fill out these blanks, or or create your project in your own time. So that's the asynchronous aspect of that virtual classroom.
Hmm.
And synchronous is when we meet together, and then let's discuss, or you've got questions for me as a teacher, and then we can meet together, and you can go into small discussion groups around what you've come up with. Maybe we're doing a jigsaw method of learning. all those things combined as an asynchronous and synchronous method, and added to that an opportunity for teachers and students to connect maybe during an office hour session, really makes for students to have a more realistic expectation of the virtual classroom environment. Because, it's unrealistic to say, to a student, you have to be online every day. Right?
Yeah.
And it's not fair. Like, Zoom fatigue is really real. So what we want to do is minimize unnecessary, meaningless, I want to say that in inverted commas, meaningless screen time, and make the synchronous time more meaningful. I want to value your time and honor your time. Also, I want to remind us of the context that we're talking about. We're in a global pandemic situation. And really, what I want to do is, or what we want to do as educators, is to remind ourselves of that and be empathetic and have empathy and give our students grace and space to move through this, according to their own family difficulties and challenges, or the different family situations, so that the lifeblood of having asynchronous and synchronous learning really gives that grace and space, and really gives flexibility in scheduling, and helps our students and our families, or we hope so.
Yeah, so I wasn't aware that the asynchronous and synchronous learning is really a new type of part of our vocabulary now. But it does make sense. When you think about the fact that you're going to have time at school, and you're going to be in the classroom, and you're going to be learning and whatnot. And then you're going to have a break, and you're going to go and spend time with your friends and enjoy their friendship. And then you're going to also go and have time after school where you're going to still enjoy the friendship and maybe work on projects with your friends. And you might also have some homework to do. So it's interesting to hear from you that this same type of experience is capable in an online classroom, because it's not just a talking head talking at you. It is this forward-thinking planning so that you can integrate both of those synchronistic and asynchronistic learning techniques into your practice. It's really brilliant.
Well, and thank you for saying that, because I think educators all over the world have started to adopt this, because classrooms need to be adapting to this new situation. So I really, it isn't something that, I came up with. In fact, as educators and as teachers, we always stand on the shoulders of giants, who went before us, who paved the way. And funny, in this situation, we came into it in about March for us here in Alberta. But of course, educators all over the world, across, in Asia, in Middle East, have gone through it a little bit for themselves too, because they've had to close their schools much earlier than we have, depending on when the pandemic hit. So the wealth that educators have been willing to just share out in knowledge, in how we learn from each other, is really incredible. And I've really been, privileged to be a part of that network, to say, oh, has somebody learned? Has somebody done this? How are you learning from each other? And funny, another aspect of that, Tim, is that when this global pandemic happened, the world's resources suddenly opened up to the rest of the world, if you like.
Yeah.
So, did you notice that?
So does that mean that teachers are learning information and learning new ways, failing forward, I guess, and then sharing those lessons with other teachers? Is that?
Yeah, for sure. Like, what worked for me, how can it work for you? Something I've learned, something you've learned. But I also wanted to sort of touch on the idea that resources. So, for example, I went to the London School of Economics. I studied there for 3 years. And when I lived there, I was living just a few hundred meters from the Globe Theatre, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. So when this coronavirus happened, the Globe Theatre decided to offer, plays to watch that, they've recorded at the Globe online. So you can actually watch those live. And funny, if you're studying Romeo and Juliet now, or Hamlet now, you can actually look at their schedule and see what they're showing or when they're showing it, to help you kind of tap into something. So for me, it's a bit of a nostalgia, suddenly having access to London Globe Theatre right here at my home, in Calgary. But still, the idea is that, and the Globe isn't the only one. Like, museums all over the world are offering virtual tours. So, at the top of my of March, my first thing was to gather resources. I'm like, where are these resources for science, for math, for English? Where can I get these resources? As it turns out, all over the place. And as much as like you might go to the grocery stores were emptying of their their Kleenex and their toilet papers, we were trying to get as much resources, and I feel like that's almost a human instinct. What do you do? But then we've had a chance now to slow down a little bit. Right? So we're not in that panic mode. We're not in that reaction mode. We're now in the more proactive thinking, planning, how can we look back? And so sort of, that hindsight is 2020, and now looking forward into the future. And, this is a good time now to be more proactive about the road ahead, be more, sort of thoughtful and intentional about the way forward, whether it's addressing teacher capacity, giving teachers more understanding, more knowledge, building our growth mindset, or giving students a little bit more capacity. Maybe we have to address some parts of how we teach, what we're teaching, and those adjustments are it's a good time to sort of think about and make those adjustments. And we're still learning. This is still so new, right?
Yeah. Is it fair to say, Sue, that technology is the pipeline or the way that you're going to be able to deliver these lessons, but it's really up to the teachers to kind of re-educate and re-implement new strategies in order to be able to make it really, really worthwhile for the students?
You are absolutely correct. Like, technology is really just a vehicle of delivery. And we as 21st century people, we really need to have really a basic understanding of the technology that we have. And of course, there is a need to understand that technology. So if something breaks down, what do? You have to have an agile mindset. It's okay. We can grab the next technology piece, or like, if the phone doesn't work, we'll get the laptop. The laptop doesn't work, we'll get the iPad, whatever the need is.
Yeah.
But it's not the determinant for necessarily for success, because teachers are there, the education, the planning will be able to adapt and learn as we go to help our students make sure we have success, right?
Yeah. There's a proverb. I can't say that it's been attributed for sure if it came from any known scholar, but basically the proverb says, "Tell me and I will forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I will understand." Will online learning really help students experience a higher level of involvement in their learning?
Yeah, I think it might have been Benjamin Franklin, but correct me if I'm wrong. Still, but we can Google that later. But the idea of involving a student and engaging, like I did my TED talk. It was on hands-on learning, and the importance of hands-on learning. Still being, because it's the way we learn, and I think that there are multitude of opportunities within the virtual classroom to still do that hands-on learning. So we talked about asynchronous and synchronous learning. Yes, I need a web camera for us to communicate. I need to have that technology. I need to be able to navigate that technology. But right here, I could back up and I could do a science experiment and do it hands-on in front of you, my teacher, and still have that learning opportunity. I have two children, and my child who's in grade 10, I was mesmerized watching her doing a science experiment at my table with leaves and to test for photosynthesis. I'm like, how amazing is it that you're doing an experiment in our living room? And that hands-on experience that she can note and make notes and observations on and make her hypothesis. Like, these are all scientific things that you might think needs to happen in the lab, but the agility and the flexibility of teachers who can share with you, look, all you need, that we talked about it earlier, art.
Yeah.
In a supply closet. Like, we don't have in every home a supply closet that is, it has art supplies out the wazoo. So I'm really in admiration of the art teachers out there who found different projects to engage and involve students in. So for example, I know a student went and got, the project was to find recycled material and make art out of that recycled material. And there was a chance for them to make the art with their hands, glue, paper, color, paint, whatever they have in their homes, and then take a picture of that. Okay, yes, that's a technology bit, but again, that facilitates the feedback and again that follow through on a piece of work that somebody's going to admire, and then they can have a gallery. And yes, that's a technology piece, but the fact is, students are really having a chance to have that follow through, have that resilience, and say, look, I don't need to make art from the newest paint and the newest canvases. I can make that right in our home. And that's like, it's almost more valuable. And another thing that came out of that project, the teacher had shared with us that, in classrooms, we often look at our neighbor and say, oh, wow, that's a good idea. Or, you're almost a bit limited to say, ooh, maybe if I do this, people might think I'm weird. But when you're doing art in your own home and in your own bedroom, you're like, I will do whatever I want and then submit it, right? And so you suddenly have, you've broken down some barriers, if you like, to copying or that shyness that you might have. And again, like, that is a hidden gem in this adversity. And we look for those, right? Because I do not dismiss that we are in, times of hardship and a global pandemic, but really we need to look for opportunities to show our students that, look, we're resilient. We can.
Does this mean, Sue, that teachers and school boards will have to change the way that they grade students on projects and on tests? Because again, the technology, people at home are probably thinking, oh, you know what, it's technology. If you're taking a test online, there's no stopping you from having an iPad beside you and just having all the answers. How will teachers adapt to grading their students on projects?
Yeah, no, assessment is huge as a way of thinking about, how do we measure? We talked about earlier about measuring understanding, and really that is what assessment should be and is, right? We're measuring our students' understanding of how they've learned what we've taught them. So yes, there will have to be a change because it's not easy to proctor an exam online. Like maybe you and I can do it one-on-one, but we can't do it for 1,000 students or bigger boards and so on. So there will need to be a change. Now, what that change looks like, I'll leave to the policymakers. But the idea that we can still assess for understanding in different ways is what we can take away from this, right? So we're assessing understanding through different projects that we've talked about. We're assessing understanding through yes, if you complete a math problem, you're no longer just submitting a worksheet. You're going to tell me how did you do this long division? You can't copy that long division. You need to actually explain your work. So that suddenly changes the field a little bit. So you now need to understand with your verbal skills how you explain things. So there was another interesting example with sports medication. Not sports medication, sports medicine, which is another subject that we teach. And that it's interesting because one of the aspects of it is very hands-on. So it's taping injuries. Now, I thought it was really superlatively exciting to see the teacher, to see students, tape their family members, because that's what they have at home. Using the things you have at home, involving your family to create those opportunities and then as a student is doing it, they're verbally explaining the reasoning between why they have to do that and why they have to, what are you trying to prevent? So again, you can assess that understanding. You can see that they're applying their knowledge, and this can be applied to many, many subjects, and I could give you more examples, but
yeah. I wanted to broach a bit of a subject that maybe you might not have to deal with, but there are a lot of marginalized children, students out there that don't have access to computers, maybe not regular Wi-Fi or internet and that kind of thing. Is this something that you see that you kind of give me your gut reaction to how teachers and maybe parents can kind of deal with that so that it's going to be worthwhile for the children?
I hear you, Tim, and I really think so. I'm originally from Singapore, and our school system really works quite differently there. But one of the things that is quite brilliant about the system here in Alberta and the Canadian system is that many schools are neighborhood based.
Mm-hmm.
So you're never more than, I don't really sure what the barriers are, but never from a short distance away from your school.
Yeah.
And teachers are still able to go into school, to say photocopy, make those sets of paper. So my reaction would be to say that there are opportunities in this adversity to deliver lessons,
Mm-hmm.
in ways which are maybe a little bit different and not necessarily what you might think is. Now, we have conversations about maybe the access to broadband internet across, making that very accessible, or again, access to technology, Chromebooks, laptops, whatever
Yeah.
kind of devices that you might need. But again, like, of course, as you mentioned, this is a policy making decision.
Sure.
But I think, again, like, but how we allocate resources to those will have to be left up to policymakers. But
Mm-hmm.
we can think about those as we go into the future, as to how we can deliver paper synchronous, sorry, asynchronous lessons. So
Yeah.
whether it's like
Not in person. Yeah.
yeah, in
Yeah.
person, like, so synchronous is in person.
In
So
person. Yeah.
asynchronous would be all those packages, or lesson packages, or things that you might say, this is what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And your project doesn't have to be a worksheet. Now, please don't mistake me in thinking I'm just asking, if you don't have access, you're doing a worksheet. But more, if you don't have access, you might have to do your project. Let's say you're taking pictures of plants in your neighborhood, right? You
Mm-hmm.
still have to do that and make your observations, write your observations down. And
Mm-hmm.
again, because schools aren't too far away from your neighborhood location, you'd go to
Mm-hmm.
school anyway. You might get one parent to drop that off. As a
Mm-hmm.
practical aspect, again, we are in a global pandemic, so as much flexibility around that, and still get students the sense of they're still learning, they're still
Yeah.
engaging,
And they're still connecting.
and they're still
We have
connecting.
a question that's come in from Linda Lou. The
Okay.
question is: are students able to learn their full year's curriculum online? Students were in classes for 6 to 7 hours a day, but the Zoom classes, will they be 6 to 7 hours? How do you fit in all that learning in shorter bursts?
Yeah. No. Well, I think part of that question has to be answered by policymakers,
Mm-hmm.
because they need to, we might have to have, a look at what curriculum might look like. So I won't, necessarily have an answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part of it is, how do we connect with our students synchronously and asynchronously? Again, like going to that lifeblood, and offering them an opportunity to maybe combine the few things that they have to learn,
Mm-hmm.
maybe making that a more meaningful connection, in terms of when we do meet online, these are the things we're going to be achieving together.
Yeah.
Now, it is going to be hard, of course. Now, it is unprecedented. Like, this situation that we're in is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
So we will need to address changes which would make sense, not just for teachers, but for
Mm-hmm.
students and families. Again, that grace and space I talked about earlier, what does that mean? And how can we, show empathy through the curriculum, and through that delivery? And yes, Zoom fatigue is real. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to spend 7 hours on a computer,
Mm-hmm.
delivering a lesson, let alone do I want my students to spend, all that screen time as well. So thank you for the question. That's really a lot of things to think about.
Yeah, and there again, maybe it doesn't take long 3 hour long lectures in order to learn one particular lesson. Maybe it's a shorter lesson, and then some asynchronous applications that allows the student to be able to go out there and to learn that lesson through their own experimentation and hands on. And that's what you're the expert in. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
And it's funny that you should say that, because we had a little, I guess, interview with students, or trying to get some feedback from students as to how it's going for them. And one of the things that the students had said was their teachers have become more efficient with delivering a lesson
Oh,
because it is now online, which
I
I
would be
thought
all
was
over
so
that. As a
interesting.
student, I would just be going, "Oh, thank goodness we can learn this lesson in a shorter amount of time and then step away from it and just reinforce it through
do your own thing, right? Well, it's funny because, the student's a bit older, of course, so we're not talking about, in kindergarten and in the more formative years. But the idea is that, if you can deliver something in 10 minutes, you won't be doing it in half an hour, right? You don't want to do that. So you're able to give them that, those asynchronous, maybe, lessons in bites, and then when you're meeting, you're delivering with, very specifically. There's not a lot of, as you would put it, fluff when you're in, when in your synchronous session. You can't do that. You don't have time because you have to go to the next thing. It's all scheduled, right? So you're going to miss your meeting if you don't go on to the, French or music or whatever else you're doing.
Wow.
So,
thank you so much, Sue. It's been very, very educational to be here with you and to learn and to hear, from your expertise what the path looks like forward. I really enjoyed learning about the asynchronous and synchronistic and the synchronistic type of learning, because I think that really is a comforting way to learn. The students will still have the opportunity to be able to learn the lessons that they need to learn in order to be able to progress in school, but they'll also have those opportunities to learn with their hands and with their heads and through their own experiential learning, and that they'll also have opportunities to be able to go and to socialize with each other in the classroom as well. And I think that those are three very, very powerful ways forward.
I'll add to that the fact that they can learn on their own time, right? That flexible aspect to the asynchronicity. If you feel better learning in the morning, you might want to do that. If you're more a night owl, you might want to do that with your parents' permission. Some kids still have bedtimes.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very, very good point. Thank you so much. Sue Mylde is an ed tech integrator, actually.
That's right. Yeah.
And which is a very highly specialized field of education.
I'm going to say that I really work as part of a bigger team and really learning from that team and my team of teachers that are all around me. And really the message that I've learned from this time is that, emphasized more and more, is that only in trying to raise each other up can we really all rise together to rise to this occasion and make the best of this, the lemons that we have, making lemon meringue pie, not just lemonade. Okay.
And lemon tarts, because I love lemon tarts.
Okay, yeah. That too.
Oh, that's great. We sure do appreciate having you as part of the Level Up conversations here presented by TEDxYYC. And again, thank you very, very much for your insight into what the future may look like. And the future is literally right now. So hopefully the teachers and the students and the parents out there have learned something here today. Thank you very much, Sue. And we wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you. Thank
you
so much.
Thank you. My name's Tim Tamashiro. We've been watching Sue Mylde talk about technology and the way that we're going to move forward as far as online learning, but also use our heads and our hands. This is all part of the TEDxYYC Level Up Conversations. And that does it for this edition. And you can stay tuned for more editions as they come on. See you soon.